there's a few things in responding to real-time situations. I think it's important, but also strategically. I think it can help us be present, but also think really expansively, and not just sort of like daydreaming or like big ideas, expansively temporally. By being in the present moment, we can sort of see into the future, not in some strange new age way, but we can reasonably calculate and be strategic 5-10 years out based on 5-10 years prior.
Welcome to Clicks and Bricks Podcast. We talk about the entrepreneur mindset.
If you get one shot at this, what kind of shot are you going to take?
If we forget who we are, they're going to forget who you are.
And you've got an adversity story that's out of this world.
Everything from that Main Street brick and mortar to that billion-dollar manufacturer.
Welcome back to Clicks and Bricks. Today we're talking with Jonathan Reynolds. He is the founder of Mindful Life, Mindful Work, and he's helping leaders grow in their businesses. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Ken.
Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to have you on the show today to talk about your business. Mindfulness is something that is really important to me. Unfortunately, I didn't find it until my later years in life, but it's something that I'm practicing on a pretty regular basis today. Before we jump into your business, your current business today, can you tell us a little bit about your history, where you're from, and what possesses you to take this entrepreneurial path instead of a corporate America or working for a small business?
Great. Thank you for the question. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin and really saw models of people that went to work and worked very traditional 9-to-5 jobs, and most of whom didn't seem particularly happy. And so when I graduated from college in the mid-90s, I didn't want that, and I didn't really want to be on anyone else's schedule. So I really was, whether that was a dark night of the soul or sort of a lost moment for me, it was a really creative moment, because then I really sat with that and decided, well, what do I want to do? What's my best version? And out of sort of that vacuum or out of that spaciousness, started to piece things together. At that time I found mindfulness. So started practicing, started to see development in myself and sort of, ease around how I was in the world. And then wanted to, really Mindful Life, Mindful Work grew out of my own interest in mindfulness and really built up around, and I think good entrepreneurship, that happens. We have a personal passion and a personal interest. And then, we want to scale that, or we want to build that out in some way that our life and who we are and what we care about becomes our profession. So there's sort of a seamless integration. As I'm sure talk about, that's difficult for entrepreneurs because then the balance gets challenging. But when you're the product and what you care about, I think the ideal is getting paid not for what you do, but for who you are. So it's seamless. So you can just be in the world as you are and make a living because that's your value. And so Mindful Life, Mindful Work grew organically over time around that, around my own practice, around collecting and gathering folks. And then, it wasn't until 2018, so not that long ago, that we formed it into a formal entity, a C corporation here in the United States. And, we're building the ship while we're on it, which every entrepreneur knows.
Absolutely.
It's never a finished product.
No, it is never. Well, I guess on exit day, it's a finished product, right? And then it's somebody else's baby to play with, right? You've created it,
Mm-hmm.
you've sent it off. It's kind of like a kid getting married, and somebody else has got all of those problems and benefits of the business, right? So It's a beautiful thing. So Mindful Life, Mindful Work. I love the name, and I want to get into that. But you made a statement in that little intro that you did. Get paid for who you are, not for what you do. And I think that's a really cool mindset to have, right? And it's one that's, I feel like it's growing in popularity. Do you see that in the marketplace today?
Yeah, I think that, it's challenging to actualize and realize in a way that isn't too cumbersome as a business. And yet, I think that's the ideal is what's your value in the world? What's your key value proposition, whether that's a product or a perspective or a service? How do you position your gift in a way that it's not something extra that you have to sort of contrive, but that, and then the challenge is positioning it in the market. Is there a need for your gift in the market, and finding where the overlap is? And that's really been the arc of my professional life. Is in the early days, it was hard to sell because I didn't know how to sell. And I didn't know what would be the right way to position it. And so a lot of my own growth arc as an entrepreneur this is what I love to do. This is what I want to do. Can I make a living out of it? And then growing into that over time, and really being consistent in messaging. So yeah, I mean, that's why we're talking. I love what you do, and I love the conversations you have.
Awesome. Yeah, on the sales side, I hate sales world. I am really good at selling products that I love, and I'm horrible at selling products that I can at least, if I can like pull one string on the sweater and it starts falling apart, then I cannot sell that product. It is out of my wheelhouse to sell something that I'm not truly passionate about. If I'm passionate about it, it's not even selling. It's just taking orders. Right? It's just like, oh, you want to work with me? Great. Let's talk about that and let's move forward. I hate the line selling, ice to Eskimos, because they don't need it. Like, why would you do that? I think that's a bad mantra to have. But that's the mindset that our country, America, was in for years, right? Oh, the hardcore sales guy in Mindful Life, Mindful Work. Do you think that that's changing today, and we're going in a more holistic approach to sales?
I think definitely people want value and they want meaning. And like you said, purpose as well. If you're aligned with what you're selling, it's not selling, it's just sharing the value. When I'm in a good conversation and somebody wants it, the value sells itself when it's aligned. And then when it's aligned, it's fun because it's a conversation around what you both actually care about. And I think the recognition also has to be there that unless you're in a true sales conversation, you're never selling to the person you're just talking to at a cocktail party. You're selling to their network. They know about 1,000 people, and you're just getting the word out on your value because they're not going to be the right person most likely.
Right.
But they know enough people. And so, I think that is a really holistic approach, but it's also sort of a trusting the process approach in the sense of, as an entrepreneur, you need to just do what's important to you, provide the value you have, and trust that the right folks will find it. And that is sometimes very difficult to do because sometimes things are really slow and difficult.
Right. How do you, as an entrepreneur, business person, how do you find that product that really, or find or develop, right? Because there's two ways to do it: is you can develop it yourself or sell somebody else's stuff, right? How do you know that when you've hit it right?
For me, it has to be embedded in every touch point or nexus of relationships and conversations. So when I'm, for instance, looking for team members or I'm looking for prospective buyers, at every communication, there's hints at what the value is, sometimes explicitly, but it should be in every sentence and every exchange, because that filtering then brings you, it's a natural funnel. It brings you to the right 100 conversations you can be in, because even if you get into the right 100 conversations, you're still only going to close 1 to 5%.
Right.
And so you want to raise that to 5% if possible. And so everything has to be a filter and a funnel, and you have to be really clean and clear that you're actually talking about what you want to talk about. Because if you morph it too much to try to only meet the client and you don't care about it, like you said with the sweater, even if they need a sweater, if it's a no good sweater, I want to be able to sleep at night. I want to know that I actually provided value. I helped somebody's life. That's the ideas behind conscious capitalism, right?
Right.
Like capitalism as a force for good. When it's aligned and all stakeholders are supported, you sleep at night and make a lot of money. Those should go together.
Yes, absolutely. The way I know it is I absolutely feel obligated to let people know about the product or service that I offer, or I feel obligated to be there if somebody would want it. Right. So it's almost an obligation for my businesses. Like, I've needed this in my life, so I've had to create it because it didn't exist. And I have an obligation to make sure that it's here for other people in the world that might need it or want it. Right. privately owned data
I think there's
center,
a sense of
a small
duty.
boxing school, right? They're my two big businesses today that I like to operate. And I feel obligated to be here for my customers on both of those.
I think that's so fantastic. And that sense of duty, right? That sense of this has real value. I've realized that value and touched that value for myself. And there's a sense of generosity in there too. Like I don't want to keep it to myself. I want to give it. And to give it sustainably is to make it a financial process. Otherwise, you can give it away for free for so long, but then all of a sudden it disappears and people say, where did the free service go? Well, it's not sustainable if it's a free service.
People don't even want it if it's free. Like, it's harder to give away. I think it's harder to give away something than it is to get somebody to buy something from you. In some case scenarios.
I think that's almost always true. I think you're right on, is that, and I think whether they know that deliberately or they're self-aware enough to know that that's true for them, that they want to ensure the commitment for themselves as well. When I was a new business coach years ago, I had lower fees and, less people committed. The returns and the deliverables and the outcomes were less because less people were buying in fully. And then they can discount the service. And, anytime a business owner, definitely a service-based business owner, has trouble getting clients, I always say, raise the fees. That's how you get more clients. You don't get it. You think you should lower and that you make it available to more people. You don't get less clients when you raise your fees. You just get different clients. And I think that's really important for service providers to know, that you want the clients that are fully committed.
Absolutely. You don't want the bottom. There's a meme that goes around, and every now and then I see it. It's like, my highest paying client, the transaction's like, here's your service and here's your money. And my lowest paying client is, here's your service. Oh, I'm not going to pay you yet. And I've got 25,000 questions, right? It's just this weird thing of the amount of money that they pay. It's the education level of the client that you're dealing with. Especially, I think that's more true in technology than other businesses, but.
Yeah, I think it's really complex. It can be tied to that. It can be tied to other things. But I think that we could get into a very rich discussion, I'm sure, around socioeconomics and all of that. And yet there is a lot of those folks sometimes land in sort of a scarcity mindset. And then that's the results are scarce.
Right.
And so, it's not magic. It's when you really buy in, you really follow through, you really get results.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat, Jonathan. Explain to us, what is mindfulness?
Wow, that is hot. And I think really a really great question. Part of the reason we made Mindful Life, Mindful Work, that instead of Mindfulness Life, Mindfulness Work, was because we do make a distinction. Mindful is even more ambiguous than mindfulness. It can mean careful or attentive or focus. It can mean all sorts of things to different people. And that was by intention, because we wanted people to ask that question, to be in that conversation. Mindfulness has sort of also become ambiguous in a certain sense. It means different things to different people. There are classical and traditional definitions that mean, non-judgmental awareness and things like this. I think there's an important component to mindfulness, though, that is often left out. And for me, that is continuity or sustained attention. Anybody can be hyper attentive for an instant, but it's challenging when we're in an argument with our spouse. It's challenging when something difficult happens in our life. Can we sustain the attention, and not perfect attention, but can we have some self-awareness when we're triggered?
Right.
And so for me, mindfulness has that sort of more robust over time component, and that develops over the time of a person's relationship to it. I like to say, for the first 3 years that I practiced mindfulness, I was pretending to practice. Everybody just starts doing their best and doesn't really know what they're doing.
Right.
But that's how a good practice you grow into, by recognizing that there's some value and pretending until it starts to feel like it has some traction in you.
Absolutely. I think the way I look at mindfulness is just being present in the moment, right? I'm currently here. But in business, like, I do the same thing over and over and over. It's so easy to check out. And you balance your checkbook. You don't need to be fully present balancing your checkbook. If you're making widgets, you don't need to be fully present, right? You've got a lot of muscle memory and you can kind of go through the motions. Why is it important in business specifically to make sure that you're always mindful or present in the moment?
Well, first, I'll agree with you on the other point. There's an economy of attention. There's a few things in responding to real-time situations. I think it's important, but also strategically. I think it can help us be present, but also think really expansively, and not just sort of like daydreaming or like big ideas, expansively temporally. By being in the present moment, we can sort of see into the future, not in some strange new age way, but we can reasonably calculate and be strategic 5-10 years out based on 5-10 years prior. And there's a thinking component to that, a cognitive component to that, but I think there's also just a basic awareness component that helps inform processes like that. And so I think as much as possible, everything should be infused with mindful attention because it enhances things. It makes the decisions more in line with what's actually happening. Otherwise, we tend to operate from past habits, and some of that might be really great, and some of it we might not want.
Right. So you implied that being on autopilot sometimes is, I don't know if you implied that it was beneficial or that it was okay. Is it beneficial to be able to go on autopilot from time to time?
I think for certain things, if you're cutting and pasting a bunch of text and doing it over and over, like some small business owners have to do to like send out messages.
Right.
Unless you're getting the names wrong, it's like, again, knowing where, it's sort of a pick your battles.
Right.
None of us are perfect at being mindful. None of us have infinite attention. Where do we want to place our attention? What matters to us? And I think, again, mindfulness can be sort of a real-time support in that for sure, but it also can be a strategic when we sit maybe for an hour with a cup of tea and think about what do I want my business plan to be for the next year. I think it's really helpful to be able to sort of clear the space and get creative. So I think with creativity, I think with relationships, communication, definitely. So we're not coming from this sort of reactive place, but more of a responsive place.
Right. So it's my experience that being mindfulness, present in the moment, all those things, it's challenging to get there, but when you get there, it's really, really gratifying and beneficial. Do you have any idea why it seems to be so hard to be in that mind space, but so easy to drift out of it? It doesn't seem fair. It's almost like it's super easy to gain weight and super hard to lose it.
Well, there's a couple of questions that I hear. One is that, especially when somebody starts practice, when we start practice, it's very easy for the ego or the old ways of doing things to co-opt the practice and just make it another self-improvement project, and then to beat ourselves up when we're not seeing results. It's more of a self-acceptance project. And so I often have CEOs and clients start with like 2 minutes a day, not some big 20 or 30 minutes a day. And what happens to most of them is they start sneaking extra minutes because their ego wants to tell their friends they're meditating for longer. Then they miss a day or two, they feel bad, and they quit. And so the challenge is to keep it so simple that you can do it. And so that's sort of the first piece in cultivating. In the beginning, it is challenging. It's sort of like shooting a rocket up to the atmosphere. You need a lot of jet fuel, but once it's up there, it just can float around. And so this sort of leads us into the next point, is you sort of are putting money or into the piggy bank of awareness every time you practice. You're sort of strengthening the new muscle of mindfulness or mindful awareness. And so you change your disposition and your propensity to that becomes a little bit of more of a default. And, I think it can happen quickly. We can have lots of interesting growth and insights early, but I think to really have some real character trait changes, it has to be for a little while. I've been practicing now, I think, for 25 years. And so there's some stuff in the bank, hopefully. And so I think being patient and those moments you slip out of mindfulness, if you notice, you're mindful. If you don't notice, that's when you're truly not mindful. So it's not about some perfect mindfulness. Like when I sit on my meditation cushion in the morning, I'm not just like floating in the air and like everything's cool. No, it's challenging every morning because I'm human and because that's good practice. The best practice is the one you do. It's not some magical, it has to be a certain way.
Right. I use the line a lot. Champions workout starts when the pain gets there. Right. So if it's just coming easy to you every day, then you're probably going through the motions a little bit. You've got to challenge yourself, push yourself a little bit further to stay in that mindset. Mindfulness, I think I've been practicing for about 7 years. I went into liver failure about 7 years ago and had to make some significant changes in my life. And I find myself, getting there. And I think I'm the opposite. I can get started really great, but then those little hiccups kind of put me in these, and then I'll go long stretches without thinking about it for a while, like 30, 60 days sometimes. And then I notice myself snapping at people more, making bad decisions. Those kinds of things happen more and more frequently when I'm not in the good mindfulness space. So I think it's wildly important, right?
Well, you mentioned something important. It's almost hardest practice when you don't see any reason because things are going good, and that's when a lot of people's practice drops off until the negative comes back, sort of thing. And it's really it's like daily hygiene, right? Like you brush your teeth every day,
right.
And so you brush your mind every day, just a little bit.
I skipped the shower yesterday. I don't stink today. I can do it again, right? It's the same with my weight, right? I had a donut yesterday. I didn't gain any weight. I could eat another donut today, right? And then I'm eating a donut every hour.
Well, and the opposite is, of course, the person who, you don't work out once and say, I'm healthy for my whole life now. You recognize that this is something you need to do regularly.
Right.
And so the same sort of thing.
Absolutely. I love it. I like it a lot. So as a mindfulness business coach, right? Or somewhere in that world, if you run across somebody that needs this in their life, but they don't know that they need it yet, do you make any attempt to communicate the benefits, or do you just say, they're not ready yet, and if they're really, standoffish about it right out of the gate, is there a mechanism to show somebody the light that, hey, this is a better way to live your life and specifically run your business, right? Because if you're not there, I think if you're not there, unless you're some kind of saint of a person, you're probably not treating your employees the best way you probably could. You're probably not treating your clients the best that you could.
Well, I think you've touched on a really important point, which is part of mindfulness is self-awareness, being aware of ourselves. And in matters of self-awareness, it's really delicate when conveying that to somebody else, because inevitably, I know anytime somebody's told me something about myself that I wasn't aware of, I immediately often feel shame. Like I should have known, or they know something about me that I don't. And I've heard others report similarly. And so I think one of the best things you can do is by modeling, by embodying what is important to you. And then those that are curious will ask. With Mindful Life, Mindful Work being the company name, a lot of the people that come to work with me are sort of already on board a little bit.
Right.
But to varying degrees, sometimes people just want to make more money and that's why they come, and that's a valid reason. But then we look at what actually causes more money to come in. Is it just about, better marketing and better sales? Maybe it is, but maybe there's something more cultural or systemic or relational. There very often is. If you're looking for partnership companies and that sort of thing, the way that you relate to them is going to determine who ends up saying yes. And so I just think it's really important, though, not to push it. I've had clients come to me and again, they wanted to get a promotion, an individual client at a corporation. And then at some point throughout our work, she realized that there was an awareness piece that she was getting. And so I think sometimes, again, just by holding the space, it's sort of like tuning forks. Your guests respond to you in the way that you show up. And of course, they have their unique selves, but you set a theme and an intention, and that's mostly what you get.
Right.
And so I think the same is true. I think that's part of the reason we called the business Mindful Life, Mindful Work, is we wanted that to be our beacon in the world. And I think it's really important with whatever a person's business is that they send up the signal of what they want to attract.
If you were to tell me in my 20s or early 30s that I need to practice mindfulness, I would have probably called you, some hippy dippy woohoo. I'm like, oh, are you going to give me crystals next, right? And I'm not talking bad about the folks that like the crystals. It's not my jam, but if it helps you do whatever you need to do, I support the heck out of you. Right. But as I got older and I saw that, so I scratch my head often. I'm like, man, how do you get through to somebody that doesn't see it? And that they're probably the person that needs it the most. But I feel like it's probably a personal journey that you have to be ready for it to get it.
Well, and it's part of the reason why I hadn't used the word meditation or mindfulness. I was working with really old school businessmen in healthcare companies in the Midwest and things like this. And you can deliver the good stuff in a way that the person can receive it. I'm not attached to the language of mindfulness. Things like dignity and care and being a good person and being aware of what you're saying, like you can say these things in ways that it doesn't scare people off. And so I think that's where I've been successful in ways that other mindfulness practitioners maybe have fallen a little flat. Is I'm a pretty good translator around some subtle experience things that I think that have been really helpful to people. And I think that that's a good message to any business person: is don't lead with the language. Wait and hear the language of the client and solve their pain point. And if you don't have something that can do that, then you might not be a match. And they might circle back 5 years later when they have your need for your thing. And again, I think that's trusting the process, seeing a more holistic perspective on what it means to actually succeed as a business.
Okay. Is it important for a business owner or a leader to have a meditation practice?
I think it's important for them to have a practice of self-development. And that might be photography or art or walking in nature. I think a mindfulness and a meditation practice can be immensely useful. It's been the foundation of my whole career path. But that everybody's different. Everybody finds their way to greater self-actualization, if I can use that, in their own way. And just because there's something that maybe I consider mindfulness, somebody else might have something completely different that they consider mindfulness. And I think that the two sort of cornerstones of our work have been accessible and applicable. And so I think that if people find something that helps them grow, that's accessible and applicable, and they find a way to tuck their services into the world that they're in, whether it's their small community or whether they have a global business, I think they're going to do just fine.
Okay. So if it's not meditation, it's some kind of other self-improvement activity. I have friends that are business owners that, pick up playing the guitar, piano. I know a lot that end up picking up boxing or some kind of martial arts, mostly jujitsu. It's not as impactful. So those kinds of activities are also, you think, are wildly beneficial to a business owner.
I think internal discipline, all of those speak to me of internal discipline and practice.
Okay. I couldn't agree with you more. What specifically, other than internal discipline, does a practice like that give you as a business owner?
Well, I think ultimately what it gives you is that self-knowledge gives you clarity around what you want to do. And when you have clarity, you have conviction. And I've had a lot of, I think, clarity and conviction in my life. So I'm always a little taken aback when somebody doesn't have much, and lots of people don't have much. Lots of people are sort of like, what do I do? And so for me, holding that open space of uncertainty is its own answer, because the answer comes flooding in. Sort of like holding a glass beneath the surface of the bathtub and then the water goes in. I think a self-practice sort of holds that glass down, and then whatever rushes in is your answer.
Right.
And so, you can call that a calling or whatever you want to call that. But to find the thing that it is for you, I think that's some sort of practice. I mean, if you talk to folks that study martial arts or Aikido or those sorts of things, they're describing the same stuff.
Right. Absolutely. So for me, I think and obviously I only know what my brain is like. I don't know what other people's brains are like inside there. But prior to, meditation, these kinds of things, my mind was always like a collision of chaos and ideas and thoughts and all these things. And I didn't know how, without drugs or alcohol, to really focus in on something, right? Or be on one single path until I started practicing a lot of these things. And you're right, you have to practice clearing your mind so that you can focus on one specific thing. And I think that's why martial arts and combat sports picks it up so quickly, because you don't have a choice, right? When you're in there, you have to be just thinking about what's going on at that moment, or you're going to get punched in the face. And that might happen anyway. But so that's why I like combat sports so much, because it gives me that instant, okay, I'm here in this moment. There's nothing else going on in the world. And that's a good practice for business, because you have to make singular decisions very frequently.
Yeah, and you want to make those decisions in tune with what matters to you. And if you're not present, you might be making them in tune with what matters to somebody else or to no one. And so, like, how to be aligned with yourself makes running a business fun. Doesn't make it easy. It's always going to be challenging, but it makes it fun.
Absolutely. I love it. If somebody's out there watching and they're like, man, I don't know about this mindfulness stuff. Seems a little woohoo to me. What are some tricks, tactics, strategies that they could use that would kind of show them some more immediate results if they're just not practicing at all today?
Immediate results. I don't know if I've had that question before. That's a challenging question, because there has to be some sort of inner sort of impetus to practice at all. There has to be some feeling of, oh, I'm not in alignment, or this isn't all that life is, or I don't feel true to myself, or something like that has to sort of tickle in there,
right,
in a way that's sort of irritating. And then, and so I would recommend practicing for very short periods of time, like a minute a day, like something that seems so simple,
right,
because you want to set yourself up for success. The other thing to do is, the way that I started is I bought some books on meditation. I didn't know what I was doing, and somebody had said a name or something, and I went in and I bought a book or two, and, sort of hid in my room with a flashlight so nobody knew what I was doing, and started to sort of educate myself a little bit around why would somebody do this?
right.
The other thing, and this is a little bit bigger leap, it can be really helpful to have a community, whether that's like a mindfulness group or something. That doesn't always feel safe or comfortable initially, because when we sort of go to our first thing, we feel brand new and really awkward. But if you know of anybody who already has a practice, sort of making them a friend in practice, because that can also help us through the bumpy times that we want to quit, or we don't care, or we forget, or whatever. It's sort of like having a workout buddy. The reason you go running at 4:30 in the morning is because your friend's out on the corner. You're in your warm bed. Why do you get out of there?
Right.
Well, because you have an accountability to someone other than yourself. And so those are maybe some helpful starters. There's a lot of resources. Also happy to just have a call with somebody if they have any questions. Again, this is how you pay it forward. You pass it forward.
Absolutely. And if somebody did want to talk to you, Jonathan, what would be the best way for them to either reach out to you, or if they weren't ready for the phone call, just learn more about you and what it is that you and your team do?
The website is mindfullifemindfulwork.com. I know it's a long one. We're on all social media platforms. They can find us, and there's messaging through most of those. And just continue the conversation. Like, again, I think if you're open to the exploration, that's all that you need. That's how I started. I was just curious.
Absolutely. And so some of the things that I think would be good for first timers, a membership at like a Massage Envy or something like that. So you can go once a month and like really just let go of all of your stresses. If you haven't tried Reiki or cupping, like any of those, what seem to be fringe arts, I think are great ways to start this practice. And just to get used to spending an hour doing something you haven't ever done before, and with the specific intention of relaxing your body and your mind together. I think it's really beneficial.
I think those are great suggestions, Ken. And things like yoga, if you're looking to get a little exercise,
Yes.
and then you can have a little bit of that awareness component. And there's lots of apps. I forgot to mention there's, things like Headspace and Calm and the big ones. But there's lots of apps that I'm sure are free, and you can just, you can listen to a recording or something, and then you can be like, this isn't so bad or so weird.
Yes.
It's there's ways in that support everybody.
And my tip on yoga, if you're an older guy like myself, slow flow yoga is where it's at. The hot yoga is too much. And some of the yoga can get tough, man. It's pretty intense. So
it is tough. I've practiced for about 25 years yoga as well. It sort of came along with the mindfulness. And I can tell you that you don't always get more flexible physically. Like that's and that's not necessarily the goal. The goal is to have a practice that feeds you in some deeper way. I mean, maybe you get more flexible physically, but ultimately, if you get good teacher, they're not pushing the physical flexibility.
Right.
It's more about the open-mindedness.
Absolutely. I remember the first time I went to the gym as a business owner, and I had to put my phone in the locker for an hour. And my anxiety was through the roof. Like, I've told this story a couple of times, like literally through the roof. I called the team, 20 minutes before and say, okay, I'm going to go do this. I'm not going to be available for a whole hour, guys. Like, you know what that means? You can't call me if something happens. And I remember being so anxious about not having my phone with me for that hour.
Wow.
And it probably took a year before that anxiety of not having my phone. And today, my phone goes in the locker at 6 p.m. It comes out at 9 p.m. Almost every day of the week. So it's a much better place to live, because businesses will burn you out if you don't have some other practice in your life that can help you calm your mind.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience.
Well, I think it's true. I think you have to have that capacity to know that the whole thing isn't going to burn down if you're not there, and have good people that can respond as good as you can.
Absolutely.
I mean, what's the saying? A good leader develops other leaders. They don't develop a team of followers.
And the same when you're coaching a team, you constantly tell them, if one person in this world can do it, anybody can do it also. And you have to reflect on yourself and say, oh, if I can run this business, other people could too. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
and that's a good thing. That's a relief as a business owner. I mean, the ego might take a little hit the first time you hear that, but then you're like, boy, that's just a better world to live in.
Yeah, now I can go start a second business or a third or a fifth, right? And it's that's where you can get to if you. But if you just stay buried, if you keep your head buried in the sand, I don't think you can get there. Some people can. I was not capable of getting out of my own way without a lot of this practice. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. I hope the audience, if you're watching, you've got a little bit of information that can help you with your business and moving forward. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with before we go?
You can do it.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Have a great day, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Ken.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching today's episode of Clicks and Bricks. Get to work.